The story of Mexican ancestry is far richer and more intricate than many realize. Stretching back thousands of years, it encompasses migrations, invasions, and cultural exchanges from every corner of the globe. Today, the genetic makeup of Mexico resembles a vibrant tapestry, woven together by diverse peoples, each leaving their unique imprint. This genetic journey stands as a testament to how Mexico's population evolved through blending and adaptation. However, it is only in recent times, with the aid of genetic studies, that scientists have started to truly grasp the complexities of this heritage. For many Mexicans, cultural pride is deeply rooted in their indigenous origins, while others identify with a blend of European, African, or even Asian ancestries. These identities are not merely symbolic, they are inscribed within the DNA that defines modern Mexicans. Advancements in genetic science have unveiled the specific origins of these genetic influences, tracing them back to significant historical events and migrations that occurred over millennia. Such studies have revealed that the diversity of Mexican ancestry is unparalleled in Latin America, showcasing deep connections to indigenous populations, along with influences from Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. In this video, we will delve into the various layers of Mexican ancestry, exploring 8 key sources of genetic influence. We will uncover the indigenous foundations that form the core of Mexican genetics and discuss the profound impact of the Spanish conquest. Additionally, we will explore lesser-known influences, such as African roots, Asian migration, and the unexpected remnants of Jewish and Middle Eastern heritage. Through these genetic insights, we can understand how Mexico's identity has been shaped over centuries as diverse backgrounds merge to form a unique national identity. This genetic diversity tells a powerful story of resilience, adaptation, and unity, a story that defines the Mexican people today. Long before European contact, Mexico was home to diverse indigenous civilizations with advanced societies, complex languages, and rich cultural practices. Some of the earliest humans arrived in the region over 15,000 years ago, settling and thriving in a land abundant with resources. These early populations laid the groundwork for Mexico's indigenous ancestry, and their influence endures in the DNA of modern Mexicans. Among the most prominent of these ancient civilizations were the Olmec, Maya, and Aztec. However, they were just a few of the hundreds of indigenous groups that developed unique cultural and genetic identities. Each indigenous group contributed distinct characteristics to Mexico's genetic pool. The Olmec, often regarded as Mexico's mother culture, left a lasting impact on the region's genetics, as did the Mayan civilization, whose descendants still thrive in southeastern Mexico. The Aztecs, dominant in central Mexico, also passed down their legacy both culturally and genetically. Beyond these well-known civilizations, other groups, such as the Mixtec, Zapotec, and Tzotzil, developed in different regions, further enriching Mexico's genetic diversity. In many modern Mexican states, particularly Chiapas and Yucatan, people retain high percentages of indigenous ancestry, preserving the genetic markers of these ancient populations. DNA studies have shown that indigenous ancestry remains a major component of the modern Mexican gene pool. Although the Spanish conquest and subsequent intermarriage between indigenous peoples and Europeans led to the emergence of the mestizo population, many communities maintain predominantly indigenous genetics. In fact, some regions exhibit a nearly unbroken genetic link to their ancestors, offering a unique connection to Mexico's earliest inhabitants. This indigenous foundation provides modern Mexicans with a direct tie to the lands, languages, and traditions that have endured for thousands of years. The resilience of these indigenous genes attests to a cultural and biological continuity that survived conquests, epidemics, and centuries of change. This deep-rooted ancestry forms a core part of Mexican identity, bridging the present and the ancient past. The Spanish conquest in the 16th century brought about dramatic changes to the Mexican genetic landscape. Led by Hernán Cortés in 1519, the Spanish invasion set in motion a complex cultural blend, as European settlers intermingled with indigenous peoples through intermarriage, alliances, and forced assimilation. A new genetic and cultural group, the mestizo, emerged. Today, this blend of European and indigenous ancestry defines much of Mexico's genetic identity. The Spanish not only contributed their genes but also introduced a new religion, language, and set of traditions that transformed Mexico's social and cultural landscape. When the Spanish settlers arrived, they brought a significant genetic influence from southern Europe, especially Spain. Many settlers were of mixed European and Middle Eastern descent, which explains why traces of Mediterranean and even some North African genes can be found in modern Mexican DNA. The Spanish crown also encouraged settlers to intermarry with indigenous populations to consolidate power, deliberately fostering a blending of heritages that established the mestizo population as the dominant social group. Mestizo identity became central to Mexican culture, symbolizing a new, uniquely Mexican people born from both indigenous and European roots. Over time, the mestizo population expanded, spreading throughout Mexico and into remote regions. Even today, mestizo ancestry is the most common heritage among Mexicans, with the majority of people having mixed European and indigenous DNA. However, this Spanish influence is not uniform. In some regions, particularly in the center of the country, European ancestry is more pronounced, while other regions retain a higher percentage of indigenous DNA. The genetic legacy of the Spanish conquest has shaped Mexico's national identity, reinforcing the concept of mestizage, or the blending. The fusion of European and indigenous roots is celebrated as a symbol of unity and diversity, defining Mexican identity across centuries. The African roots in Mexico's genetic history are often overlooked, yet they form an essential part of the nation's diverse heritage. During the colonial period, Spanish traders brought enslaved Africans to Mexico, primarily through ports like Veracruz on the Gulf Coast. Between the 16th and 18th centuries, hundreds of thousands of Africans were forcibly transported to New Spain, modern-day Mexico, to work in agriculture, mining, and domestic labor. This influx not only introduced new genes into the Mexican population but also helped shape the cultural identity of certain coastal regions. Despite facing oppression and hardship, many enslaved Africans made significant contributions to the cultural fabric of Mexico. In places like Veracruz and Costa Chica along the Pacific coast, African heritage is evident in music, dance, cuisine, and even religious traditions. The Afro-Mexicano music of Veracruz, which blends African, Spanish, and indigenous sounds, exemplifies how African culture influenced local traditions. Genetic studies have shown that Afro-Mexican ancestry is particularly prominent in specific coastal regions, though it also extends into the general population. Many Mexicans today carry small but notable traces of African ancestry, even if it is not always reflected in physical traits. This hidden layer of African heritage illustrates the complexity of Mexican identity and highlights the resilience of African-descended communities who overcame adversity to leave a lasting legacy in Mexico. The contributions of Afro-Mexicans to the nation's culture remind us that Mexican identity is deeply intertwined with diverse historical influences. Through genetics, we now have a clearer picture of how African ancestry helped shape the modern Mexican population, enriching its diversity and reinforcing the nation's collective identity. One of the more surprising elements in Mexican ancestry comes from Asia, primarily introduced through the Manila galleon trade that connected Mexico with the Philippines from 1565 to 1815. This long-running trade route facilitated the exchange of goods, people, and ideas across the Pacific, introducing Mexican society to Filipino, Chinese, and other Asian influences. The Spanish galleons carried spices, silk, porcelain, and other valuable goods, but they also transported Filipino and Chinese immigrants, many of whom settled in Mexico, especially around Acapulco, the main Pacific port. Chinese, Filipino, and other Asian workers who settled in Mexico intermarried with indigenous and mestizo populations, leaving genetic markers that are still detectable in certain areas today. Their contributions extended beyond genetics. These early Asian communities influenced Mexican art, cuisine, and commerce. In fact, certain dishes in Mexican cuisine, such as pasta, noodle dishes, and various rice preparations, reflect an Asian influence that originated with the Manila galleons. This blend of cultural elements demonstrates how Mexican identity absorbed aspects of Asian traditions through trade and migration, adding another layer to its rich heritage. In modern times, genetic studies have identified traces of East and Southeast Asian DNA in some Mexican populations, especially along the Pacific coast. This unexpected genetic heritage highlights the breadth of Mexico's multicultural history and how far-reaching influences have left their mark on the population. The Asian influence in Mexico may not be as prominent as European or indigenous roots, but it remains an intriguing part of the genetic story that defines the diversity of Mexican ancestry. Through these genetic links, we can see how interconnected Mexico was with the global world even centuries ago, bridging the Atlantic and the Pacific in ways that shaped its people. Another often overlooked aspect of Mexican ancestry comes from Middle Eastern and Jewish influences, primarily introduced by Sephardic Jews and other Middle Eastern migrants who arrived in New Spain from the 16th century onward. Many of these settlers were conversos, Jewish individuals who converted to Christianity often under duress but maintained cultural ties to their Jewish heritage. Persecuted in Spain and Portugal, many conversos fled to the New World, hoping to escape the Inquisition's reach. Over generations, they integrated into Mexican society, introducing subtle traces of Middle Eastern and Jewish ancestry into the genetic mix. In addition to conversos, other Middle Eastern immigrants arrived in Mexico during the 19th and 20th centuries, including groups from Lebanon and Syria. These later waves of immigration brought more Middle Eastern DNA into Mexico, particularly in urban centers like Mexico City and Puebla. While these populations were relatively small, their influence can still be seen today, both genetically and culturally. Some Mexican families trace their roots back to these early Jewish or Middle Eastern settlers, and certain communities maintain traditions linked to their ancestral origins. Genetic evidence supports the presence of minor but detectable Jewish and Middle Eastern ancestry among some Mexican populations, often in regions with historical ties to these immigrant communities. This aspect of Mexican heritage illustrates how migration and religious persecution in Europe and the Middle East contributed to the genetic diversity of the Americas. Although Middle Eastern and Jewish ancestry forms a small percentage of the Mexican gene pool, it adds another fascinating dimension to the story of Mexico's multicultural origins, reflecting the resilience and adaptability of people who sought new lives and opportunities across the Atlantic. Mexico's regional diversity is remarkable. From the heavily indigenous regions of Oaxaca and Chiapas to the European-influenced areas in central Mexico, each part of the country has a distinct genetic makeup that reflects its local history and geography. In states like Yucatan, the population retains a high percentage of Maya ancestry, while Chihuahua and Sonora show more influence from European settlers and, in some cases, even North American immigrants. Recent genetic studies have mapped this regional diversity, revealing how migration, trade, and historical events have shaped the genetic landscape of each area. In the South, indigenous heritage is more pronounced, with local populations often showing over 80% indigenous ancestry. In the North, European influence is stronger, partly due to historical factors like proximity to the United States and waves of European immigration. Coastal regions, particularly Veracruz and Guerrero, showcase higher percentages of African ancestry due to their roles in the colonial slave trade. This genetic diversity within Mexico demonstrates how centuries of migration and settlement have created a country that is a true mosaic of ethnic and cultural backgrounds. Regional differences in Mexican genetics are also reflected in cultural practices, language variations, and even physical traits. For example, certain regions maintain traditional languages and indigenous customs, while others have adopted cultural elements from European or African heritage. These regional distinctions enrich the broader narrative of Mexican identity, highlighting that Mexico is not a monolithic culture but rather a complex patchwork of influences. This genetic diversity underscores the adaptability and resilience of the Mexican people, revealing how distinct histories have united under a shared national identity. The genetic origins of Mexico offer a unique perspective on the country's complex and multifaceted identity. From the ancient indigenous civilizations that first settled the land to the waves of European, African, Asian, and Middle Eastern migrations, each group has left its mark on the Mexican gene pool. This blending of ancestries reveals a story of resilience, adaptation, and unity, a testament to the diversity that has defined Mexico over centuries. While genetic studies can trace these varied influences, they also remind us that Mexican identity is more than the sum of its genetic parts. Mexican culture has embraced these diverse roots, forging a unified national identity that celebrates its indigenous, Mesoamerican, and immigrant heritages. Whether through language, music, cuisine, or traditions, Mexicans have woven their rich cultural backgrounds into a shared identity that honors the past while looking toward the future. This complex heritage is a source of strength and pride, allowing Mexico to stand as a symbol of multicultural unity in a globalized world. Mexican genetic diversity challenges conventional ideas of race and nationality, demonstrating that identity is fluid, ever-evolving, and enriched by different influences. Understanding the genetic origins of Mexicans allows us to appreciate the complexity of human history and the power of shared heritage. Ultimately, Mexico's story reminds us that diversity is not something to be overcome. It is a vital part of what it means to be human, a source of resilience, creativity, and unity that defines people across generations.